Good evening, everybody. Once again, I'm Matt Strain, member of the board of directors for the National At-Home Dad Network, and we are here for our monthly webinar series. Our guest tonight is Martin Lloyd. Martin has created a role-playing game called Amazing Tales, which is designed to be played by parents and their children, ages 4 and up. And being a nerd myself and having grown up playing D&D and all the rest of it, when I discovered the game about 3 or 4 years ago, I was really excited, and I can't lie, I'm incredibly excited to have Martin here with me. It's great to meet you, and again, why don't you tell us a little bit about Amazing Tales?
Okay, well, thanks very much, and yeah, it's great to be here. So Amazing Tales is my very, very simple role-playing game, which I wrote to entertain my daughter one afternoon, and which many years later, well, about 4 years later, made its way out into the world as an actual published product, and people seem to like it. It's an extremely simple system, and it's built around the idea of just following your kids' enthusiasm and telling the story together with them in a way that kind of gets them to engage with what I think of as the fundamental bits of role-playing. That is, you're putting yourself in someone else's shoes, you're coming up with these hopefully amazing tales, and you are, at times randomizing what happens. You don't know exactly what's going to happen, and that is a stimulus for everyone involved, that suddenly you have to work out, what happens when the knight doesn't beat the dragon, or what happens when the really strong hero can't pick up the log, and that's the kind of thing that makes role-playing games different from make-believe, I think, is that those unexpected things come along and push stuff off in new directions. So that's kind of the opening pitch, I guess.
Great. I know that, like, when I was a kid, there was nothing this simple. When I started playing role-playing games, they were relatively complicated, very like math and table heavy. One of the things that I know I like about Amazing Tales is that it really does minimize like the dice and that type of thing, and it's mostly designed for almost like being able to sit down and do a bedtime story together with your kid instead of you just telling the bedtime story to them.
Yeah, that's quite deliberate, I think. What I've kind of realized about game design, a lot of this was sort of happy accidents, and then I've spent a lot of time looking back at it and thinking, why does that work? And part of it is just throwing away all the bits of role-playing games that everybody says you have to have or assume you have to have, but it turns out you don't need. So the number one thing that people suggest is hit points. They say, oh, you should put hit points in the game. And some people even sort of get the rules, read the rules, go, yeah, we're going to play this game, but I'm going to put hit points in because otherwise it's not a proper game. You don't need hit points. And first, you're never going to kill your child's character. That would just be wrong and terrible. And then there's plenty of other ways to make things exciting without kind of going, oh, you had 7, but now you've got 2. Is that really more exciting than saying you're clinging to the edge of a cliff by your fingertips, or you are being lowered into a cooking pot by a giant? I think there are plenty of other ways to ramp up the tension apart from kind of moving arbitrary numbers around. So the simplicity of it was really quite deliberate. And then the other thing I found out sort of while thinking about this thing I'd written and what people had done with it was that one of the reasons it works is it's interesting and engaging for the grown-ups and the kids. And there are loads of activities you can do together with your kids, which your kids are really into, and you are really not. And I believe Goodnight Moon is the American classic. And yeah, there we go. And Baby Shark, I believe.
Oh.
And you know, the first time is fun, and the 10th time is acceptable, and the 50th time you really want to be somewhere else. And that's because there is no mental stimulus for the adult anymore. You know, you're doing this thing with your kid, and your kid is into it. Particularly, you know, if they're very young, these simple games, stories where they know exactly what's going to happen, that's enough for them to be thinking about and find it exciting and new each time. And my personal bugbear is snakes and ladders. So, you know, in the end, there is nothing you can do. The ultimate lesson is your kids can learn to take turns and deal with losing.
And count.
That's about it. That's all they can teach.
There's some basic counting that they can learn from that.
Yeah,
but
counting, that's true.
That's worthwhile for like 1, maybe 2 times playing through.
Yeah, but you know, when my kids were explaining to me, like, Daddy, I'm really good at rolling 6s, and my sister's really good at rolling 5s. It's like, yeah, you know, I'm tuning out now.
That's not how that works.
Is that the adult has to think, and that's actually entertaining and that's enjoyable. That your kid is saying, well, I do this, and then you have to, okay, what's going to happen in the world, and then you start to discover all the crazy stuff that your kids come up with. And that, you know, is really interesting, and it pushes things in really great directions. So that was kind of the other big thing I realized. Both sides of the activity find interesting. But it's not something you get in a lot of kids' activities. And then that is actually what creates real quality time, because kids like it when their parents are engaged. That's the number one thing. It's the difference between, you know, kind of if you're kicking a football around with your kid, and sometimes parents are really into it, and they're really, and you know, they want their kid to learn to play football, and they're enjoying it, and they're helping them and showing them, and sometimes they're just kind of kicking the ball and not listening. And the children know, you know, they know whether they're getting 100% of mummy or daddy's time or not. And the nice thing about role-playing games is really hard to do them at kind of even 80% attention. So either you're playing and you're engaged and you're there in the moment with your kids, or it's not really going to work. So it's a kind of guarantee of some quality time, I think.
It is, and especially you know, with everything that's going on in the country right now, with so many of us being limited in any type of activities that we can do with our kids. I know a lot of my daughter's favorite things to do and favorite places to go are currently closed right now in our hometown. And, you know, I would much rather have her be engaged with me, like playing a game, telling a story, than have her parked in front of a screen, zombifying herself while she watches, you know, honestly, the same cartoon show for the 3rd time, because they're okay doing that. And I want better than that for her. I want her to constantly be engaging her brain and learning new things. Same with my son. I mean, granted, he just turned 3, so he's not quite there yet, but you know, it's definitely something exciting.
Yeah, and I think it's a bit different for them as well. You know, it's a new thing that they can do, and if you are a gamer and are kind of playing games at home with adult friends, then it's something that they can actually really sort of relate to, I guess, or that they want to do. So my kids knew that on Thursdays, Daddy's friends came over, and we all sat there and we drank beer and ate chips, and there were these big books, and there were these weird dice, and there were bits of paper and pencils, and we were making up stories or playing a game. And so they were really happy that they got to do that as well, and that they could do that too, and that they also had a book and a piece of paper and some weird dice, and that it just all mapped and they were doing the same thing. So that was really cool.
Yeah.
And when COVID hit, it was kind of obvious that this was an activity that a lot of parents might be able to get something out of. But, and kind of the way I thought about it was, you are stuck in your house, but that doesn't mean you can't go on an adventure. And just trying to provide some people with that sense of freedom and exploration and being somewhere else and experiencing new things, even if they're just by sort of sharing your imagination with your kids, was hopefully going to be useful to people. So that's why I did the free quick start thing. And then after I did that, somebody on our Facebook forum, we have a Facebook group for Amazing Tales, and somebody
on it.
Yeah, and somebody posted a one-page adventure they'd written, which was a My Little Pony adventure. And I saw that and I thought, that's really good. And I thought, I probably shouldn't share that for legal reasons, but I really like it. And I like the format. So I thought, oh, I'll write one of those. So I wrote a one-page adventure, and I put it out. People quite liked it. And I thought, oh, I'll do another one. And that ended up turning into 21 adventures. Because I wanted to do one for every piece of character art in the rule book, which I didn't tell anyone at the outset because I'm a terrible completer finisher, but I did actually complete and finish 21 adventures in 21 days. And then that's all out there now as a kind of big free pack to download. I mean, there's a pay what you want thing, so and that all goes to charity. But that was basically the sort of contribution to getting people through COVID. And those adventures seem to work. People seem to like them. And I kind of started exploring different genres a little bit. So there's a proper sword and sorcery one in there, and there's a classic procedurally generated dungeon crawl. So all kinds of stuff.
Well, one of the things that I really liked about Amazing Tales when I first looked into it was that you created a game that doesn't limit the kids' choices in any way, shape, or form. I mean, having grown up playing, the classic role-playing games, your Dungeons and Dragons, and the rest of it, your Amazing Tales was never set up as, okay, you're going to be this race, this class. It's literally, I think the wording that you used in the book was the first question to your kid is, what kind of hero are you? Yeah. And that's awesome because they can be, a pirate or a spaceman or a superhero or a pony if that's what they're into. I'm sure my daughter will choose dragon.
Definitely. And I think this is, again, I realized this all sounds like I'm some kind of, like I thought about it really hard. Actually, I kind of realized all this stuff afterwards. But the big kind of promise of role-playing is you can be anything you want to be. It's like explore amazing worlds and do amazing things. And it's not quite like that in most of the published systems. Is that the promise of be anything you want is very quickly boiled down to, but actually you're picking off this grid of 6 species and 6 classes. So you've got 36 options, but actually 24 of them are rubbish. So if you care about that kind of stuff, why would you? So yeah, these are really your only choices. And yeah, that's kind of doesn't really work for me as an introduction to role-playing. I think once you're a bit older, once you know about kind of genres, once you can be like, yeah, I want to tell a Star Trek style story, and that means everybody's in Starfleet, and some of you are going to have ranks, someone's got to be the captain. Once you understand what that all involves, then that's a great way to set up a game. But if you're just trying to get kids going from the very start, Yeah, why would you start by saying, okay, we're going to try and explain a whole world and a whole background and a whole rule structure before we really start? Why not start from what kind of hero do you want to be?
Yeah. And like that honestly was the one thing that caught my attention about the game more than anything else. Because again, I remember being a kid and being like really, really upset that, I had to make the decision. And again, I'm old enough that I was back in the early days of AD&D, and I remember being really upset that I had to pick. Did I want to be good at fighting or did I want to have magic? And there wasn't an option to do both. And that limit was kind of a problem. Later in my college years, I found one other gaming system that offered the freedom of being anything that you wanted, and that was a game called Tales from the Floating Vagabond, which was definitely not made for children.
Yeah, I may have played that. I've certainly come across it.
Yeah, it was more of a humor-based game than an adventure-based game. But again, other than that, like you said, everything was set up with this very, very rigid structure, set up around things. Now, I want to take this opportunity to let all the people watching know, at the National At Home Dad Network, we do a book giveaway every month. And if you go to our public Facebook page or you look for us on Twitter or Instagram, you will find a link that you can click on, and that will enter you into the drawing to win a copy of Amazing Tales. And Martin, generously enough, as we were getting things ready, had asked how many books we were giving away. And I mentioned that, we were giving away one, and he said that, why don't you give away 4 of them, and I'll make sure that we send you guys 3 more copies. So for any of you guys that were worried about, oh, I never win these things, well, there's 3 more chances to win a copy of this book now. So please go by and enter that drawing. And you can get a free copy of this book to play with your own kids at home. It's a gorgeous book, full color. They actually keep it on the shelf at my local gaming store here in Durham, North Carolina.
I have weirdly, I'm in Europe, and
right.
Specifically the Netherlands, and all or almost all the copies that get sold in America, because that's where, partly because of how my distribution deal works, and partly because of that's where the English-speaking gamers live. So I've yet to actually see a copy in a shop.
Oh,
I've seen photographs. But,
I sent you one of those photographs or posted it on the Facebook group once a long time ago. It was at the very top of the display of games for kids.
And I know that there are bookstores in the UK that carry it, but I've not yet managed to get across to one. So.
Well, you need to work that out, because it's got to be, for lack of a better term, it's got to be a bit of an ego boost to walk into a store and be able to point at something and be like, yeah, I wrote that.
Yeah, I think so. I'm looking forward to it. It'll happen one day.
One of the things that I came across recently, after you and I had initially contacted each other and you had talked about being interested in having this talk, right after that, a couple of people released a couple of independent supplements to your game. One of them is written by a teacher, and one of them was written by a therapist. And both of them were available to download for free to any families or teachers or anybody that wanted them, because there's always been talk of the wonderful opportunities of role-playing games to help in education, and that I grew up with. I mean, I was the kid that knew more about medieval combat in like 5th grade than most college kids did, because I was obsessed. But somebody actually put together a supplement that talks about using it in the classroom. And he even opens with the, yes, I am talking about running a role-playing game with a party of 30 kids.
Yeah, so that all came about because there are two questions that I have been asked since I published Amazing Tales, which I can't answer. One is, how do you use this in the classroom? And the other is, how do you use this, or could you use this for therapy purposes? And I kind of felt it would be irresponsible if I tried to answer either of those questions myself. So when we were doing the Kickstarter for the current project we're working on, which will be out hopefully in a few months, one of the things I included in there was I will get my friend Baz, who is also a teacher and who does use Amazing Tales in the classroom. I'll get him to write something. And I'd also, via the Facebook group, had been contacted by Lily, who is a practicing therapist in Hong Kong and also works with a Game to Grow people who do the sort of Dungeons and Dragons product for kids with special needs. And she said, yeah, well, from younger or less advanced kids, I'm also working with Amazing Tales. So brilliant. So you can answer questions and maybe you'd like to write something. So those things happened. So yeah, and I was really, really delighted with the results because I knew that Baz had run a couple of games of Amazing Tales in his classroom. That was what I thought was going on, and it turns out when you read the document that it's a lot more than that. He's essentially worked it into every part of his teaching, and has really used it as an integral tool for his kids in everything from sort of history to maths to art to whatever he's teaching, geography and so on. So that was fantastic, and it's packed with advice. And he is a gamer of many, many, many decades of standing. So he's got lots of really useful hints and tips for any GM. And then he'd come up with this way of how do you play a game with 30 kids? And the answer is you kind of divide them into groups of about 5, and they have one character. But then you assign the duties of running that character separately around the table. So one of them has to report back the actions, which is the caller, which I am not sufficiently old school that I knew about this, but this was apparently how D&D ran in the very early days. Was that the party had to agree their actions and the caller would relay it to the GM. So you have a caller, you have some people to take the decisions, you have somebody to write down what's happening, you have someone to draw pictures of what's happening, you have someone to roll the dice, and so they kind of divide it out among the kids, which sounds brilliant. I've yet to actually see it happen, but it sounds fantastic.
I'm just having memories of trying to run a game as the dungeon master where I had like more than 4 or 5 adult players and the chaos that ensues. I'm just trying to imagine having to coordinate 25 or 30 kids. That sounds terrifying, honestly, but again, that's why I'm not a teacher.
No, I train my son's soccer team, which is 9 boys for an hour, and they really want to be there. And that is enough, after 1 hour with 9 enthusiastic kids, I need some time. So yeah, all huge respect to the teachers who go out and do this for 5 or 6 hours at a stretch with 30 kids who maybe don't want to be there. And then Lily's piece was also really interesting because this is something where kind of I don't have any hands-on experience and also don't feel particularly qualified to say anything and didn't want to say anything without someone who was qualified kind of being okay with it. And so he's put together a kind of survey of these are the sorts of things you could address through role-playing games, and these are the ways that might work, and this is what it would look like. And there were some really interesting ideas in there, in particular the one that when you're doing this to sort of help a child address an issue, you might choose to play the game in a way that makes it less fun and in some ways more antagonistic. So if you're trying to teach your kid to deal with frustration, then there needs to be something frustrating in the game. And ordinarily, I would say as a someone running a game for a child, you probably shouldn't make it frustrating. That would be annoying. You want to keep it moving forward. But no, if you want to trigger someone's frustration or reflex, then so you can talk about it afterwards, then you have to have something frustrating occur, and that kind of thing. So it was really interesting to get this sort of shift where, okay, there are benefits you get just from playing a game, and those are good. But to deal with specific problems, you need to change it in particular ways. And, that was quite a insight for me.
Yeah. Well, I want to let everybody out there who's watching know we are live, so you can enter questions on our YouTube page, or if you are watching on our Facebook page, you can ask us questions in the comments of the Facebook page, and I'm sure Martin would be more than happy to address any questions that you have. I know that we've got a bunch of guys that were waiting in the wings. A lot of these are some of the exact same guys that I hang out with when the National At-Home Dad Network throws their convention. There's a couple of guys on there right now, Jonathan Long and Micah Adams, who I know both of them are avid role players. I know Micah plays Amazing Tales with his kids all the time. If I'm not mistaken, one of his kids actually runs the game.
Yeah, that was something that started happening that I kind of hoped would happen, and then I started getting reports that it did. So people kind of going, yeah, my 5-year-old ran a game, my 6-year-old ran a game, and now definitely confirmed reports of 4-year-olds who have run games. So.
All right. Well, I must be behind. I need to get focused on getting Lily playing this now. So it's now that the book is out there. Obviously, this Amazing Tales game is your job right now. Is producing more content for it and doing game design and that type of thing. But you're still at home being the primary caregiver for your kids, right?
Yeah. So basically, after 14 years of working with Greenpeace, I'd written the book, I'd published the book, and it was doing all right. And we had a discussion at home about what were we going to do, and I'm in the hugely privileged position that my wife's career is sufficiently successful that we could say, well, if you want to go and be an entrepreneur, well, we don't actually need the money from your job, so you can give it a go if you want. So we decided, yeah, I was going to work kind of half my time on Amazing Tales and half my time looking after the kids. And as it turns out, the kids are at that kind of, when I started doing this, they were 9 and 7, and now they're 11 and 9. And that's an age at which, they require a lot less looking after. Certainly in that 2 years, there's been a huge shift. But yeah, so we took the decision that I was going to work on Amazing Tales for at least a couple of years, and at the end of that, we'd see how it was going. So that'll be the end of this year. We'll have a little evaluation, and yeah, basically, I would try and move the whole thing forward. And I think, as is usual with me and projects, I have loads of stuff I want to get done, and it's all taken a bit longer than expected, but it's also all happening. So new things are occurring. Some of the things are things I planned. Some of the things are things that just sort of happened. And yeah, it's moving along nicely.
Well, that's good to hear. I'm hoping that when the review comes in, that it's going to be a good review for you. That you're happy with how things are going.
Yeah, I mean, so far, mostly what I've learned is that, there is not a huge amount of money in writing role-playing games, but there is a lot of fun to be had, and, it's engaging and entertaining. And I've started doing some freelance writing, which is great. So I've writing some stuff for Cubicle 7 for their, currently for their Soulbound game. So I have a few pieces that are in their starter set, and there's a booklet of adventures in the GM screen, which I wrote 5 of, but some bigger kind of more significant things coming out for them in the next little while. And yeah, we'll see how that goes, but that helps. It's about kind of, and international licensing is a thing that I have been learning all about. So Amazing Tales exists in Polish, it exists in Italian, and it exists excitingly in Brazilian Portuguese.
Nice.
And if there's anybody watching this who, has a games company who would like to be translating it into a language that isn't on that list, do get in touch.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I believe it's quite big in Poland, which is not bad.
No, not at all. Not at all. I can't lie. You're living my childhood dream right now. Like my dream was to grow up and work for TSR Hobbies and like write D&D books or Gamma World or whatever game I was into at the time. It's good to hear, but it's also nice that by making this choice, you also still have the freedom to be home and be a very active part of your kids' lives, because that's something that most of us, all the guys in the National At Home Dad Network are in a very similar position where we're the ones that are the primary caregivers for our children.
Yeah, it's been really nice. I mean, I'm also lucky that I live in the Netherlands, and so when the kids were born, my wife and I both went down to working 4 days a week, which is almost but not quite a right you have here. So you can basically go to your employer and say, I've got a kid now. I'm going to work 4 days a week, and there's not a lot they can do about that. Obviously, your pay goes down by 20%, but you get that. So we both, when our daughter was born, we both said we were going to work 4 days a week, and we would do that until she was in school, which was 4. And then our son was born 2 years later. We said, okay, well, we'll extend that until Ruben's in school. We'll work 4 days a week. And as it turned out, we both ended up moving to new jobs, which demanded we work 5 days a week if we were going to, do the career thing and move on, when he was 3. So I always had this feeling that I kind of owed him a year, that he had a year less than his sister and kind of deserved some time. So that was another part of the thinking behind doing this, was like, okay, I can go and make good on that and spend more time with my kids. And then, of course, what happened on my very first day as a stay-at-home dad was, I take the kids to school, that's good. I go to pick them up, and they both make play dates with friends, and I don't see them again until kind of 6 in the evening. Oh, this was not the plan. So yeah, we ended up actually agreeing that there were days that they weren't going to play with their friends, or their friends had to come to our house, that kind of stuff. Because yeah,
It is one of the downsides. It is one of the downsides to being the stay-at-home parent, is that you rapidly become old hat. I can spend all day playing with the kids, but when mommy walks in the door after work, I may as well not exist.
Yeah, that kind of thing does happen. But it's been, that side of things has been very worth it. I think I've appreciated that. Kids have appreciated that. And also that I can do other stuff, so that I had the time to say, yeah, I'm going to coach the soccer team, was, it was a really big deal for my son. He was really happy about that. Yeah. And in the meantime, I've had to, learn how to be a soccer coach. So I actually went out and did the very first qualification. But I've now got a foot on the ladder. Who knows? In another 20 years, I could be managing Real Madrid.
That is something that I live in fear of. Is that either one of my children are going to suddenly get really into sports because I was not a sports kid. I spent recess in the library with my friends, playing D&D and reading D&D books and comic books and that type of thing. So children suddenly got into soccer or baseball or that type of thing, there'd be a pretty harsh learning curve for me.
Yeah, well, people don't hide from it, and I think one of the great things about the kind of current explosion of nerd culture or geek culture or just gaming culture, whatever we call it, is that it's kind of overriding some of those old divisions. Um, it shouldn't make sense to assume that the kids who are the ones in the library playing games are not going to be the ones playing sports or vice versa. But that is actually changing a bit. But we can all be nerdy and obsessive about our favorite TV shows because everybody is. It's
Right.
not a weird one at school anymore. So I'm kind of enjoying that shift. And
I can say it is rather different to not be looked at differently for being that kid reading comic books or what I mean. I think one of the biggest shocks for me was the phenomenon that happened with Game of Thrones. There was no two ways about it. Suddenly, the most popular TV show in the world at some point became something with swords and magic and dragons, and it felt like we were in Bizarro world all of a sudden.
yeah, it was. These were discussions you could have at work with your colleagues, and yeah, that was rather than kind of with the three people you knew were into it as well. That kind of stuff was great, and I think the whole superheroes thing as well around the Avengers movies has maybe contributed as well. But kind of okay, it's everyone can talk about superheroes now, like as grown-ups, and we can kind of talk about Tony Stark's character arc, or if we want to, or maybe just how cool the fight scenes are. Um, my personal favorite, how amazing the typography is in Black Panther. But that really is just me. Um,
Well, one question that I have is that what advice do you have for the parents who didn't grow up playing role playing games, who might be intrigued into stepping into something like Amazing Tales, but they feel like a little intimidated by the idea of having to be, the dungeon master or the game master or whatever?
do it. That's the best advice. Do it. Um, maybe read the book first. The book is full of slightly more extensive advice than that. But uh, the only way to do this is to do it, and it's really not that hard. And it's certainly not that hard if you have one player and they're 4 or 5 years old. It's kind of in the end you're just telling a story with them and rolling some dice, and it's going to be fun and it's going to be brilliant. And nobody is going to tell you that you're doing it wrong. It's a little bit like when I play games with the kids, I like to draw pictures as we go, and I can draw a little bit, like not artists draw, but a little bit. And then I started encountering people who would say, "Well, yeah, I'd like to do that, but I can't draw." And I realized there is a solution to this. Either you can draw better than your kids, and the way people think about drawing is if you can draw better than them, you're an amazing drawer. Anyone who can draw better than you is by definition brilliant. And so if you can draw better than your kids, then you should do the drawing. And if your kids are better than you, then they should do the drawing. But either way, you're going to have pictures. Someone's going to think they're brilliant, and that's going to work out just fine.
Yeah.
It's a little bit like that with running the game. Is you're going to do it, and if it turns out the other person at the table should be doing it, well, let them do it. But it's going to be brilliant, and it's going to work out just fine.
All right. Well, Oddly enough, I feel like the crowd that's watching is a little on the quiet side right now, but I don't seem to have any other question. Oh, what? I'm sorry, I just reloaded something. Here we go. Any tips for the kids who are wanting to DM for them to come up with their own stories or plots?
Ooh, probably. Hang on, let me think. So, uh, if you're at school and they start teaching you about stories, they'll tell you things about beginnings and middles and ends, and that story should have those things. And I'm going to suggest that you forget that. What you really need is someone who wants something, and then your story will happen. Or someone who wants something and can't get it. So, if the dragon wants to eat the princess but can't, why not? And what's the dragon going to do in order to be able to eat the princess? And don't be afraid to put things the other way around once you've got a statement like that. Why? What if the princess wants to eat dragon? This is actually much more interesting. Why is there a princess who is trying to hunt down dragons so she can eat them? And how might the heroes get involved in that? That might be an interesting story.
Yeah.
So I think stories kind of tend to come out of people who want things and can't have them, and are prepared to do stuff to get them. And that might sound a bit advanced for kids, but I think it's simple enough to work with. And if you want to tell a story about a giant robot with 12 arms, then that's pretty cool. But your next question is, what does he want?
Mm-hmm.
And then go from there. What does he want, and why can't he have it?
All right. I do want to apologize to the people watching. Apparently, my chat feed froze because right after I said things were quiet, I pushed a button and realized that I have missed all kinds of questions.
Well,
so we're going to play catch up here for a little bit. Another one of our watchers asked, working as an at-home dad, especially in a creative job, demands a whole lot of discipline and organization. He was wondering how you plan out your day.
Oh, that's so kind that you think that. It demands a lot of discipline and organization if you're going to work at any kind of reasonable pace. And I'm not sure I do. So I'm maybe not the best person to ask about this. I am not one of those people who can kind of go, today I will write 3,000 words. The habits I have got into, stuff that needs to happen regularly, I actually calendar and I stick to that. So Wednesday morning is finance. There's not that much bookkeeping involved in running Amazing Tales, but it all happens on Wednesday morning, and that happens regularly. I pay people on time. The other stuff that has to happen, the online ads and so on, that all gets scheduled as well. The rest of it is fairly flexible. I work with a zero inbox. That helps a lot. I use my email as to-do list. I'm a big fan of the getting things done system, if anyone's come across that, which basically says, there's a whole book about it, but I boiled it down to about 2 of the bits of advice. One was only have one list of things to do. So don't have multiple to-do lists, only have one list. And then there's a related piece of advice, which I got from a friend of mine, I think, rather than the book, which is, he says, he has a list of 3 or 4 projects that he's working on, never more than that. And as long as he's working on one of those things, he doesn't care which one. So, he's not stuck with the situation of, okay, now I must write that next chapter of this thing, because he can also say, well, if I go off and do this piece of research, that's equally valuable, that's worth doing. what he doesn't get sucked into is that what I really need to do now is read another 3 hours worth of newspaper articles or whatever, kind of.
Okay. A couple other fun, a little bit more interested, or fun questions, less detailed.
I'm defending that last question.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was going to say more fun questions. One person wanted to know, what is the funniest game of Amazing Tales or character that your kids have been responsible for?
Oh, that my kids have been responsible for. I think it was definitely funny. I'm trying to remember any kind of details that will justify the statement, but I let them, or they decided they wanted to GM for me. And slightly to make a point, I played a character who had no really useful skills. So he was a wizard, but I think he could only do things like rabbits out of hats. He was, I think, possibly good at running away, things like that, and still somehow managed to defeat a dragon and the invading orc army, something like that. But it was, I wish I could say something hilarious now, I really do. But at the time, it was very funny.
Do you do any of the convention scene? Because I know, especially among like the gaming conventions and the rest of it, a lot of your game designers end up being featured at these conventions, and it enables you to travel out and meet some of the players of your game. Do you do any of those?
Yeah. So the plan this year was that I was going to do that for the UK. I've basically not really been to any gaming conventions. I'm very clear in my mind that if I was running Amazing Tales from the US and there was not a global pandemic going on, I would be hitting every convention I could and loving it, I think. But my plan this year was to be in the UK for the Dragon Meet, which it might still happen, and UK Games Expo, which everything was set up. I had the train tickets, I had a place to stay, and that all fell apart. So my plan is to get out and do more of the convention scene, basically as soon as the situation allows, and yeah, maybe a trip to the States as well as part of that could be done.
One of the interesting comments that I see here is we've got a couple of guys watching who have talked about how they have a giant folder full of characters that they keep that the kids have made up. Yeah. And I hadn't thought about that, but that really sounds like a nice little keepsake to be able to look back on, like the.
Yeah, I'm not in my office, or I would show you mine. But yeah. So I have those character sheets from my kids and the pictures we drew for the stories, and it's always amazing how much stuff comes back when you look at them. Even these random little scribbles. And I still know that random scribble was, was actually a fairy appearing and not just a kind of strange blue shape.
Well, Martin, I want to thank you for your time. We're hitting that 1 hour mark, so we're going to wrap things up. Again, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your time with the National At-Home Dad Network and any of the other parents who joined us in our webinar. We'd love to keep in contact with you. We're not doing the in-person convention this year, but we will be doing it in 2021 as well as future years after that. And if you ever find that you happen to be on this side of the pond around the right time of year, we'd love to have you stop by and join us. I do want to remind everyone to don't forget to go ahead and register for that drawing. There will be 4 copies of the Amazing Tales core rulebook being sent out to people that are watching right now. Anything that you want to add before we go ahead and call it a night?
I think maybe the key thing is if people have questions that haven't been answered, or you think of questions later, or you just want to stay involved and find out more stuff, The Facebook group is probably the place to go for that. So the Facebook page is on facebook.com/tailsamazing. As you can see, I got there slightly too late. And if you go there, then there's a link to the discussion group. Click sign up, and you have to wait for me to let you in, but I try and do that daily, and then it's good to go.
All right. Well, Martin, I know it's got to be late over there on your side.
It's 5 to midnight, so.
Well, I greatly appreciate you staying up for us. On behalf of the National At-Home Dad Network, thank you so much for your time. Thank you to everybody that was watching, and we will see you next month. Or no, that's right. We will see you in October, where rather than our normal webinar, we are going to be hosting our DadCon at home, which is going to be a one-day, all-day event. Where we're going to have multiple guests and multiple breakouts and the rest of it. We will be putting more information out there about it as we come along. In the meantime, everybody have a good night and enjoy, and try to find some good games to play with your kids.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.